He almost didn't go down to the water that evening. The sand was still warm from the day, and his daughter had already fallen asleep in the car, her cheek pressed against the window, mouth slightly open. He stood there for a minute with the engine off, listening to the ticking of the cooling hood. His phone buzzed once in the cup holder. Work. He didn't check it. He carried her down anyway. Slow steps, careful not to wake her. That's when he saw her, barefoot, shoes in one hand, standing too still for someone watching the ocean. She turned before he could look away. Long day? She asked. He didn't know why those two words felt like they landed somewhere deeper than they should have. He didn't stay long on the beach. Not because he didn't want to, because he always measured time differently now. In minutes he could afford, in risks that didn't look like risks until they were already happening. He laid his daughter down on the towel like she was glass. Her hair was damp at the edges from the car seat. Salt air clung to her skin. She didn't wake, just shifted her small hand toward her face and sighed. He stayed crouched beside her for a second, watching her breathe. The slow rise of her chest, the way her eyelashes barely moved. Then he looked up again. She was still there, his boss. Not in the way she looked in the office. No blazer, no sharp heels, no tight posture that made the room feel smaller. Here she looked, quieter, almost unfinished, like someone who had stepped out of their role and didn't know what to do with their hands. She was wearing a plain white shirt and jeans rolled at the ankle. Her feet were sunk into the sand. She wasn't holding her phone. That alone felt strange. Everyone held their phone. The ocean moved behind her, darkening as the sun dropped lower. He told himself he could just pretend he didn't see her. But she had already seen him. He could feel it. That awareness in the air. He stood slowly, brushing sand off his knees. His shoulders tightened without permission, the way they always did when something unexpected happened. He hated that about himself. The automatic tension. Like his body didn't trust peace anymore. She walked toward him, not fast, not hesitant either, just steady, like she decided something the moment she turned around. When she got closer, he realized she looked tired. Not office tired, not busy day tired. The kind of tired that sat under the eyes, in the jaw, in the way she didn't bother to fix her hair. Long day? She asked again, like she was continuing a conversation they'd already started. Her voice was softer than he expected. Not sweet, just human. He didn't answer right away. He wasn't sure what the right answer was. He didn't know what rules applied here. At work, she was Ms. Caldwell. Everyone called her that. Even the executives. Even people who'd known her for years. Here, on the sand, her name didn't fit in his mouth the same way. "Yeah," he finally said. "Long week." She nodded once, looking past him at his daughter on the towel. "She's out cold." He glanced down. She fought it all the way here. Then she just stopped. "That's how kids do it," she said. "They hold on until they don't have to anymore." Something about that line landed too close. He cleared his throat. "Didn't expect to see you here." "I didn't expect to be here," she replied. That was the first thing she said that didn't feel like small talk. He watched her face, waiting for the polished follow-up. The corporate laugh. The practiced smile. It didn't come. She looked at the ocean again. "I come here sometimes," she added, "when I can't sleep." He almost asked why. But he didn't. People like her didn't get asked why. They got assumed about. He should have walked away. He knew that. He'd been at the company less than 3 months. He was still on probation, technically. Still the new hire with the impressive resume that people whispered about in the break room. Single dad. Widower. The guy who didn't join happy hour. The guy who always left at 5 on the dot. They didn't know his story. They just filled in blanks. He kept those blanks for a reason. Miss Caldwell's gaze returned to him, direct and unreadable. "I didn't know you had a daughter," she said. He let out a short breath, almost a laugh, but not quite. "Most people don't. You keep your personal life sealed off." "Yeah." He didn't deny it. "It's easier. Her expression shifted slightly, not judgment, something else. Like she understood the word easier meant something heavier than convenience. The wind picked up, the kind that carried sand into your eyes if you weren't careful. She tucked hair behind her ear. Her fingers hesitated there, as if she forgot what they were supposed to do next. "You're good at your job," she said suddenly. He blinked. "Okay. I mean it," she continued. "You don't talk much in meetings, but when you do, it's sharp. You notice things other people miss." He didn't like compliments. Not from her. Not from anyone. They made him feel watched. He shifted his weight. "Thanks." There was a pause. Not awkward. Just hanging. Then she said, "How old is she?" 5. "That's a hard age." He glanced at her. "Is it?" She nodded. "Old enough to remember. Young enough to still need you for everything." He felt his throat tighten before he could stop it. The air went colder. Or maybe it was just him. He didn't answer. She looked down at the sleeping child again. Her face softened in a way that felt private, like she didn't mean to show it. "Does she like the beach?" she asked. "She likes the idea of it," he said. "She likes collecting shells. She hates getting sand in her shoes." Miss Caldwell gave a small smile. A real one. Quick. Gone. "She's smart." He frowned. "You don't even know her." "I can tell," she said, as if it was obvious. That made him uneasy. Because people didn't just tell. They assumed. They guessed. They projected. And she was right anyway. He watched her for a moment longer than he should have. There was something different about her eyes up close. Not the color. The weight behind them. At work her eyes looked like they were always calculating. Always 3 steps ahead. Here they looked like they were holding something back. He should have said goodbye. Instead he asked, "Do you come here alone?" As soon as the words left his mouth he regretted them. Too personal. Too familiar. But she didn't react like it was inappropriate. "Yes," she said, "always alone." The way she said it made it sound like a rule, not a preference. He nodded slowly. He didn't know what to do with that information, but it sat between them anyway. A wave broke hard against the shore, loud in the quiet. Somewhere down the beach, someone laughed. A group of teenagers, maybe. Their voices carried and then faded. "Mrs." Caldwell glanced toward the sound, then back to him. "You look exhausted," she said. He almost shrugged it off. Almost gave her the polite answer, but his body was tired in a way politeness couldn't cover. "I am," he admitted. She studied him like she was deciding whether to say something else. Then she said, "I know what it looks like." He didn't understand. "What?" She nodded toward his daughter. Toward him. Toward the scene. "This," she said. "People probably look at you and think you're handling it, that you're doing fine." He didn't answer. His hands were clenched at his sides without him realizing. She continued anyway, "But I've seen your eyes when you think no one's watching." That sentence hit like a slap. Not because it was cruel, but because it was accurate. He swallowed. "You shouldn't be watching me," he said quietly. She didn't flinch. She just held his gaze. "You're right," she said. "I shouldn't." The wind blew again. Harder. The hem of her shirt lifted slightly. She didn't move to fix it. He felt the space between them shift. Not romantic. Not yet. Something more dangerous. Recognition. He looked away first, down at his daughter, as if she could anchor him. Her small hand had slipped off the towel into the sand. Her fingers were curled like she was holding on to something in a dream. He bent down and gently placed her hand back on her stomach. When he straightened, Miss Caldwell was still standing there, still watching. "Why are you talking to me like this?" he asked. The question came out rougher than he intended. She didn't answer right away. She seemed to take a breath through her nose, slow and controlled. Then she said, "Because you're the only person at work who doesn't want anything from me." That made him laugh once, short and humorless. "That's not true," he said. "I want my paycheck." Her mouth twitched, like she almost smiled again, but then her face settled. I mean it, she said. Everyone else is performing. Everyone else is waiting for me to slip, or approve, or praise them. And you, she paused, you look at me like I'm just another person. He didn't know what to say. He didn't want to admit that he did it on purpose, that he made himself look at everyone that way. Because if you started putting people on pedestals, you started trusting them, and trusting people was how you got destroyed. He glanced down the beach, toward the parking lot. His car was up there, a dark shape among other dark shapes. He could leave. He could end this before it turned into something. But she spoke again. Do you ever feel like you're doing everything right? She said softly. And it still doesn't matter? He froze. The words weren't dramatic. She didn't say them like a confession. She said them like a thought that had been chewing at her for a long time. He looked at her then. Really looked. The wind pushed strands of hair across her face. Her eyes were fixed on him, but her expression wasn't demanding. It was tired. He could have lied. He could have given her the safe answer, but the truth was already sitting in his chest like a weight. Yes, he said. Just that. Her shoulders lowered slightly, like something inside her unclenched. They stood there for a moment without speaking. And in that silence, he realized something that made his stomach tighten. He didn't know her. Not really. But he recognized the look in her face. It was the same look he saw in his own reflection some mornings. The look of someone who had made too many choices for other people. The look of someone who didn't know how to stop. He didn't notice he was holding his breath until he let it out. Miss Caldwell stepped closer, but not into his space. Just enough that her voice didn't have to fight the wind. You don't have to answer this, she said. He didn't respond. She continued anyway. Is her mother? He felt his body stiffen immediately. His jaw locked. His throat went dry. He stared at her, not angry, but defensive in a way that felt automatic. Her eyes widened slightly, like she realized too late she'd crossed a line. I'm sorry, she said quickly. I shouldn't have. She died, he said. The words came out flat, not because it didn't hurt, because it hurt too much to shape into anything else. Miss Caldwell's face changed. She didn't say, oh my God. She didn't apologize again. She just nodded once, slowly, like she accepted it the way you accept something irreversible. I'm sorry, she said quietly. This time it didn't feel like a reflex. It felt like she meant it. He didn't trust himself to answer. His chest felt tight. His hands felt numb. He turned his head slightly, staring at the water as if it could distract him. But it didn't. Nothing did. A memory surfaced without permission. Not a full scene, just a sound. His wife laughing in the kitchen, years ago, when their daughter was still a baby. Laughing at something stupid, he said. Laughing like the world wasn't fragile. He swallowed hard. Miss Caldwell didn't speak. She didn't try to fix it. She just stood there beside him, letting the silence exist. That silence was worse than any sympathy. Because it felt like she understood, and he didn't know what to do with someone who understood. He heard his daughter stir slightly on the towel. A soft noise, half dream, half awake. He looked down quickly, relieved for the distraction. Miss Caldwell followed his gaze. She's beautiful, she said. He nodded. His throat still didn't work properly. He lifted his eyes again, and for a second he saw something in Miss Caldwell's face that startled him. Not pity. Something closer to envy. It disappeared quickly, but he saw it, and it left a strange chill in him. Because envy didn't belong here. Not in this moment, not between them. He brushed sand off his palms, trying to ground himself. I should go, he said. His voice came out quieter than he intended. Miss Caldwell didn't argue. She just nodded, like she'd expected it. Of course, she said. He bent down and carefully lifted his daughter into his arms. She was heavier than she used to be. Or maybe his arms were just tired. Her head fell against his shoulder, warm and soft. As he turned toward the path leading back to the parking lot, Ms. Caldwell spoke again. Ethan. He stopped. Nobody at work called him by his first name. Not even HR. He turned slowly. She was standing where he'd left her feet still buried in sand. Her voice was low. "I meant what I said earlier," she told him. "About you doing everything right." He didn't answer. His daughter's arms tightened around his neck in her sleep. Miss Caldwell held his gaze. Then she said very softly, "Sometimes doing everything right is the loneliest thing a person can do." His chest tightened again. He didn't trust himself to respond, so he didn't. He just turned away and started walking. The sand shifted under his shoes. The weight of his daughter pressed into his arms. The ocean behind him sounded endless, and he felt, in a way that unsettled him more than anything else, that something had just begun. Not a romance, not a story, something quieter. Something that would cost him if he wasn't careful. He reached the wooden steps leading up off the beach. Halfway up, he glanced back. Miss Caldwell was still standing there, watching him leave like she was waiting for something to happen. Then she turned away, slowly, and walked toward the dark water. And Ethan kept walking, but his mind stayed on the sand behind him. On her voice, on that one sentence that felt like it had slipped past his defenses and lodged itself somewhere he couldn't reach. Sometimes doing everything right is the loneliest thing a person can do. He didn't know yet how much that line was going to follow him. But he felt it, even then, like a shadow. He didn't sleep that night. He lay on his back in the dark, staring at the ceiling fan as it turned in slow, uneven circles. It clicked once every rotation. A small defect he kept meaning to fix. Beside him, the other half of the bed was still untouched. It had been untouched for 3 years, but sometimes he still expected to feel movement there. A shift in the mattress. A sigh. The house was quiet in a way. Only houses with children can be fragile quiet. Temporary. He turned onto his side and checked the baby monitor on his phone, even though she wasn't a baby anymore. 5 years old, and still he watched the grainy black and white screen like something might disappear if he didn't. She was sprawled sideways across her bed, one leg kicked out from under the blanket. He exhaled. Then his mind drifted back to the beach. To her voice, not what she'd said, the way she'd said it. Like she wasn't used to saying honest things out loud. He shut his eyes, irritated with himself. This was exactly what he avoided. Entanglement. Work was clean, structured, predictable. You did your job well, you went home. No blurred lines. He had chosen that company because it was stable, because the hours were clear, because it didn't ask for more than he could give. And now the person at the top of it had looked at him like she saw through the armor he'd spent years building. He rolled onto his back again and pressed the heel of his hand into his forehead. It meant nothing. It was a conversation, that's all. She'd asked about his daughter. He'd answered. People did that every day. But no one at work had ever asked about his wife. He didn't talk about her, not because he wanted to hide her, because saying her name out loud made everything feel recent again. Raw. He swallowed and turned onto his side once more. The ceiling fan clicked. Morning came too quickly. He made coffee before the sun fully rose. Packed his daughter's lunch in silence. Peanut butter sandwich cut into triangles. Apple slices. The pink water bottle she insisted on using even though it leaked. She came into the kitchen rubbing her eyes. "Daddy." He crouched and opened his arms automatically. She walked into them. He breathed her in for a second longer than usual. "You squishing me," she mumbled into his shoulder. "Sorry," he said, loosening his grip. She leaned back and studied his face. "You look weird." He almost smiled. "Weird how?" "Like when you forget stuff." He nodded once, just tired. She accepted that and climbed into her chair. By the time he dropped her off at school and pulled into the office parking lot, he had already decided something. He would act like nothing happened. He would keep it professional. He walked into the building at exactly 8:57 a.m., same as every day. Nods exchanged. Quick greetings. No lingering. His desk was near the window, but not close enough to enjoy it. A practical spot, visible but not central. He logged into his computer. At 9:15, the weekly department meeting began. He entered the conference room with the rest of them. Conversation softened when she walked in. "Miss Caldwell." Blazer. hair pulled back, expression composed. If anyone had seen her on the beach last night, they wouldn't have recognized her. She took her seat at the head of the table. Her eyes moved across the room, scanning faces. When they reached him, they didn't pause, not even a fraction. He felt something tighten in his chest anyway. The meeting moved forward like always. Sales projections, deadlines, a minor compliance issue in one branch. He contributed once, briefly, pointing out a flaw in the quarterly forecast that no one else had addressed. She nodded at his comment. "That's a good catch," she said evenly. Same tone she used for anyone else. No difference. He told himself that was good. That was how it should be. After the meeting, people lingered to make small talk. He gathered his notebook and left immediately. Back at his desk, he focused on the numbers in front of him. Data was safe. It didn't ask questions. Around noon, his phone buzzed. An internal message. From her. His jaw tightened before he even opened it. "Can you come to my office for a minute?" No emoji. No extra words. Just that. He stared at the screen longer than necessary. Then he stood. Her office door was half open. He knocked lightly anyway. "Come in." Her voice was controlled. Neutral. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. The room smelled faintly like citrus and paper. She was standing by the window, not behind her desk. The city stretched out behind her. "You wanted to see me?" She turned. Up close, she looked the same as always. Precise, put together. But her eyes held something alert, measuring. "Yes," she said, "about the Henderson account." Relief flickered through him, small but real. "Work." "Good." She walked to her desk and handed him a folder. Their fingers almost touched. "Almost. The projections don't align with what you flagged this morning," she said. "I want your take before we move forward." He nodded and flipped the folder open, scanning quickly. They stood closer than usual, close enough that he could hear the faint shift of her breathing. He forced himself to focus on the numbers. "There's a gap here," he said, tapping the page. "If we push this through, it'll look inflated next quarter." She leaned in slightly to see where he was pointing. Her shoulder brushed his arm. It was accidental. He stepped back immediately. She did too. A brief silence filled the space. "Professional. Keep it professional." She cleared her throat first. "Fix it," she said, "and send me the revised breakdown by end of day." "Okay." He closed the folder. Neither of them moved toward the door right away. There was something unspoken in the room. Not romantic. Not soft. Charged. He felt it in the way his pulse ticked at his neck. She broke the silence. "Your daughter," she said, voice quieter now. "Is she in school nearby?" The question was small, harmless on the surface. "Yes," he replied. 5 minutes from my house." She nodded once. "That's good." He waited for her to continue. She didn't. He should have left. Instead, he said, "You didn't sleep." It slipped out before he could stop it. Her expression shifted slightly. "I sleep fine," she said automatically. He held her gaze. She looked away first. "I had some things to think about," she added. He nodded slowly. He understood that answer too well. She walked back around her desk and sat down, a clear signal that the conversation was over. "Anything else?" she asked, tone back to formal. "No." He turned and opened the door. "Eaton." He paused again. She didn't look up from the papers in front of her when she spoke. "What I said last night. It doesn't leave that beach." He studied her profile for a second. "It won't," he said. He meant it. He closed the door behind him and returned to his desk. The rest of the afternoon blurred into spreadsheets and emails. But under it all, something felt different. Not because of what happened, because of what didn't. There was restraint in that office, from both of them, and restraint had weight. At 4047 p.m., another message popped up. From her. "Revisions look solid. Thank you." He stared at it. No extra words again. He typed back, "You're welcome." He hovered over the keyboard for a moment, then deleted the next sentence before it fully formed. "How was the beach?" He shut his laptop instead. At 5 p.m. sharp he left. In the parking lot, he saw her car still there. He didn't look twice. He drove to pick up his daughter. She ran toward him when she saw him, backpack bouncing. "Daddy, guess what?" He crouched down to catch her. "What?" "I drew a whale today. It was huge. Bigger than this." He stretched his arms wide. "Bigger!" He laughed, the sound surprising him. As he buckled her into the car, she studied him again. "You're not weird anymore," she said. He paused. "Good." They drove home with the radio low. At a red light, he caught his reflection in the rearview mirror. For a second, he saw what Ms. Caldwell must have seen. The tired around his eyes. The constant calculation. The effort. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel. Doing everything right. He'd built his life around that phrase. Right choices. Right hours. Right boundaries. It kept his daughter safe. It kept his job secure. It kept grief contained in manageable pieces. But something about the way she'd said it. Sometimes doing everything right is the loneliest thing a person can do. He exhaled slowly. Lonely wasn't new. He'd made peace with lonely. Lonely was stable. Predictable. What unsettled him wasn't loneliness. It was the fact that for a few minutes on that beach, he hadn't felt alone in it. And that was more dangerous than any mistake he could make it work. He pulled into his driveway. The house looked the same as it always did. Small, quiet, safe. He carried his daughter inside. Routine wrapped around him again like armor. Dinner. Bath. Bedtime story. When she finally drifted off, he stood in her doorway a little longer than usual. He watched her breathe. Then he stepped back into the hallway and closed the door softly. In the dark living room, he sat on the couch without turning on the lights. The silence felt different tonight, not heavier, not lighter. Just aware, he leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped loosely. He wasn't thinking about romance. He wasn't imagining anything reckless. He was thinking about recognition, about the way two tired people had looked at each other and seen something familiar. And he knew, deep down in a place he didn't like visiting, that this wasn't over, not because either of them wanted it to continue, but because once someone sees you clearly, it's hard to go back to being invisible. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in a long time, the loneliness didn't feel like something he controlled. It felt like something shifting. The next reek didn't explode. It didn't turn into whispers or drama or anything obvious. That was the problem. Everything stayed normal enough that he started questioning his own memory. Like maybe the beach hadn't been what it felt like. Maybe he'd imagined the weight in her voice because he was tired and needed to believe someone understood him. He told himself that a few times. He didn't fully believe it. Monday morning came with rain, the kind that made the city look washed out. He dropped his daughter off under a shared umbrella, her small hand tight around his wrist. She complained about the puddles. He listened like it mattered. It did. At the office, the air smelled like wet coats and printer ink. People were louder than usual, annoyed at the weather, annoyed at traffic. He kept his head down. By 10, he'd already finished what he needed to finish. By 11, he'd answered emails he wasn't even sure mattered. At noon, his phone buzzed again, another internal message. From her. "Do you have lunch plans?" He stared at it for a long time. Not because it was confusing. Because it wasn't. He could have lied. Could have said yes. Could have said he had a call. Could have said anything that shut the door without slamming it. But he didn't. He typed, "No." He watched the 3 dots appear, disappear, then appear again. Then her reply came. "There's a place across the street. I'd like to talk. Work-related. Work-related. Work-related." He read that twice. He could almost hear her saying it out loud, carefully, like she needed to convince herself too. He stood up, grabbed his coat, and left his desk without telling anyone where he was going. If anyone asked later, he'd say it was a client call. Outside, the rain had softened into a mist. The sidewalk glistened. Cars hissed as they passed. She was waiting near the crosswalk. No umbrella. just standing there with her coat collar pulled up, hands in her pockets, looking like she'd been there longer than she should have. He approached slowly. She turned when she heard him. "Hi," she said. He nodded. "Hi." It was strange hearing her voice outside the office again. Even stranger that she didn't look surprised to see him. Like this was something she'd already pictured. They crossed the street in silence. The restaurant was small, warm, dim. The kind of place where the windows fogged up from heat and coffee. Not fancy. Not corporate. She picked the booth in the back. He slid into the seat across from her. For a moment, neither of them touched the menu. A waitress came, dropped water glasses, left without asking questions. Miss Solder. Caldwell stared at the table for a second, as if she was trying to find the right entry point. Then she said, "You don't have to be here." He leaned back slightly. "You asked me to come." "I did," she admitted. "But you could have said no." He looked at her. Her hair was still pinned back, but not as tightly as usual. A few strands had escaped near her temples. She looked like she hadn't eaten properly in days. "I don't say no easily," he said. She let out a quiet breath, almost a laugh. "No, you don't." He didn't know what to do with the fact that she'd noticed. She picked up her menu, glanced at it without reading, then set it down again. "I won't keep you long," she said. He nodded, but he didn't respond. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Not a document, not company letterhead, just plain white paper. She slid it across the table. His stomach tightened. He didn't touch it right away. "What is that?" "A resignation letter," she said. The words didn't land immediately. They hung there. He blinked. "Yours?" "Yes." He stared at her. The restaurant noise faded behind his ears. Cups clinking, low conversations, a spoon against a plate. His mind caught on the idea and wouldn't let go. "You resigning?" he asked, voice quieter now. "I wrote it last night," she said. "I haven't submitted it." He finally reached forward and touched the paper. It was thick, like she'd printed it from a home printer. He didn't open it, didn't read it, just felt the edge. "Why are you showing me this?" he asked. Her eyes stayed on his hands. "Because I need someone to tell me I'm not being irrational," she said. That sentence hit him wrong. Not because it was dramatic, because it was too human. People in her position didn't ask for reassurance. They issued decisions. He leaned back, hands still on the paper. "What happened?" he asked. She hesitated. Then she said, "Nothing happened." He didn't believe her. She knew he didn't. She looked up, and there was a flicker of irritation in her face. Not at him, at herself. "I'm tired," she said. "I'm tired of being responsible for everything. Every decision. Every person. Every mistake that isn't even mine." He stayed quiet. She continued, voice low. "I built this division. I cleaned up messes no one wanted to touch. I took blame for people above me because it was easier than letting the company burn." Her fingers tightened around her water glass. "And they still treat me like I'm replaceable." Ethan didn't speak. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer advice. He learned a long time ago that people didn't need solutions in moments like this. They needed space to say what they've been swallowing. She looked out the window, watching the rain blur the street. "I don't even know why I'm telling you this," she admitted. He looked down at the folded letter again. He could feel the weight of it without reading a word. Because it wasn't just paper. It was a crack. A weakness she was letting him see. He should have pushed it back to her. Should have said this wasn't appropriate, that he wasn't her confidant. Instead, he asked, "What would you do if you left?" She blinked, like the question caught her off guard. "I don't know," she said honestly. That answer sat heavy between them. A woman like her should have had 10 backup plans. But she didn't. Or maybe she did, and none of them felt like relief. Ethan stared at her face, trying to understand. He'd assumed her life was power and control, but sitting across from her now, he could see the strain in her posture. the way her shoulders held tension even when she was still. It wasn't control, it was survival. He said, "You don't strike me as someone who walks away." Her eyes sharpened slightly. "Neither do you." He didn't respond. She leaned forward, elbows on the table, hands clasped loosely. "Why did you take this job?" she asked. The question wasn't casual. It wasn't polite. It felt like she was asking something else underneath it. He hesitated. He could lie. He could say better salary, better hours, career growth. But she wouldn't believe that, and he didn't feel like pretending. "My wife died," he said quietly. Her face tightened, just for a second. He kept going anyway. "I had a job before this. Longer hours. Travel. I couldn't do it anymore. I needed something stable. Something that let me be home." She nodded slowly. "And you didn't tell anyone," she said. "It's not their business." "But it's the reason you are the way you are," she said. He didn't like how accurate that was. He glanced away, jaw tight. She watched him carefully. Then she said, "You carry it like a rule." That made him look back. "What?" "The grief," she said. "You carry it like if you put it down, something will happen." His throat tightened. He didn't answer because he couldn't. The waitress came back and asked if they were ready to order. Miss Caldwell ordered soup without looking at the menu. Ethan ordered coffee. When the waitress left, silence returned. He stared at his water glass. His reflection looked warped in it. Miss Caldwell spoke again. "My father died when I was 16, she said. The words were quiet, almost reluctant. He looked up. She wasn't watching him. She was staring at the corner of the table like it held something. "He was the only person in my family who ever made me feel safe," she continued. "When he died, my mother fell apart. My brother left. Everything became unstable." Her voice stayed controlled, but her fingers were trembling slightly where they rested near the glass. "I learned early that if I didn't hold everything together, no one would." Ethan felt something shift in his chest. Not pity. Understanding. She finally looked at him again. "And now I'm 42, she said. "And I still don't know how to stop." He swallowed. There was a long pause. Then he asked, "Is that why you were at the beach?" She didn't answer immediately. Her eyes stayed on his, steady but tired. "Yes," she said finally. The soup arrived. Steam rose between them like a barrier. Miss Caldwell stirred it slowly but didn't eat. Ethan wrapped his hands around his coffee cup. The warmth didn't reach him. He said, "Why show me the resignation letter?" She glanced down at it again. "Because you don't flatter me," she said. "You don't want my approval. You don't need anything from me." Ethan exhaled through his nose. "That's not true," he said quietly. "I need this job." Her eyes didn't move. "I know," she said. The honesty in her voice made him uneasy. She didn't deny the imbalance. She acknowledged it, and that made it worse. He leaned forward slightly, voice low. "This isn't smart," he said. Her expression tightened. "No," she agreed. "It isn't." Another pause. Then she asked, "Do you regret coming?" He looked at her. He could hear his daughter's voice in his head, the way she said he looked weird, the way she noticed everything. He thought about the life he built, the fragile stability, the careful boundaries, and he thought about how alone it felt sometimes, even when he was doing everything right. He didn't answer her question directly. Instead he said, "You shouldn't be doing this with me." Her gaze didn't waver. "I know," she said again. Then she added, quieter this time, "But I trust you." That sentence landed harder than anything she'd said so far. Trust. He felt the word in his ribs. He didn't want it. Not from her, because trust meant responsibility. And he already had enough of that. He looked down at the resignation letter again. He slid it back across the table toward her. "I'm not going to tell you what to do," he said. She watched him. "But," she asked. He hesitated. He hated that she could read him. He hated that she waited like she already knew he'd say something. He finally said, "If you leave, you'll still be tired. You'll just be tired somewhere else." She stared at him. The corner of her mouth tightened, like she didn't like hearing the truth. He continued, voice quiet. "And if you stay, you'll still be tired too. But at least you'll know what kind of tired it is." She leaned back slowly, as if his words had hit a nerve. Her eyes looked glossy for a second, but she didn't blink too fast, didn't let anything spill. She nodded once. "That's exactly what I was afraid you'd say," she murmured. He didn't know what that meant. Before he could ask, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it. Her face changed immediately, professional mask sliding into place. "It's the board," she said. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. She stood quickly, pulling her coat on. "I have to go." He stood too, automatically. She picked up the resignation letter and folded it once more, slipping it back into her pocket. At the door of the restaurant, she paused. She looked at him for a long second. Then she said, almost under her breath, "Thank you for not treating me like I'm made of glass." He didn't know how to respond. She left. Ethan stood there alone for a moment, watching the rain through the window. The restaurant felt too warm now, too loud. He walked back to the office slowly, his hands in his pockets, shoulders tight. By the time he stepped into the building, the quiet balance he'd been trying to keep all week felt gone. Not broken, just shifted, and he knew with a certainty that made his chest feel heavy that he'd just stepped into something he couldn't pretend was work anymore. The board meeting ran long. He knew because the glass conference room at the end of the hallway stayed lit well past 6. Voices carried through the walls in low waves. Not shouting. Not calm either. He kept his eyes on his screen. Most of the office had cleared out by then. A few junior analysts lingered, pretending to be busy, waiting for a glimpse of something. News traveled fast in quiet places. He didn't join them. At 6018, the conference room door opened. 3 men walked out first. Suits. Tight expressions. No one smiling. She came out last. Her posture was straight, controlled. But he could see it. The tension in her jaw. The way her hands were clasped just a little too tightly in front of her. She didn't look toward him. She walked straight to her office and closed the door. The lock clicked. He stared at the reflection of his own face in his darkening screen. He could leave. He should leave. His daughter's aftercare closed at 7. He had time, but not much. Still, he didn't move. At 6:26, his phone buzzed. "Can you come in for a minute?" No greeting. He stood immediately, annoyed at how automatic the motion felt. Her door was closed this time. He knocked. "Come in." Her voice was steady. Too steady. He stepped inside. The lights were dimmer than usual. She hadn't turned on the overheads, just the desk lamp. It cast long shadows across the room. She was standing by the window again. Always the window. "They're restructuring," she said without turning around. He shut the door behind him. "Restructuring how?" "They want to consolidate divisions, merge ours with Westbrook's team." He felt his stomach tighten. Westbrook. Older. Political. The kind of executive who smiled too much and never took blame. She continued, "They're offering me a lateral position. Same pay. Less authority." That explained the resignation letter. He stepped closer but kept distance between them. "And if you say no," he asked. She let out a quiet breath. "They'll phase me out within the year." The words hung in the air. He studied her back. The straight line of her shoulders. The stillness. "And the team?" he asked. "They'd absorb most of you," she said. "Some would be cut." His pulse picked up. He didn't ask the question, but it sat there anyway. Would I be one of them? She turned then, slowly. Her eyes met his. "You wouldn't," she said. He didn't react. "You're too valuable," she added. "Westbrook already asked about you." That didn't feel reassuring. It felt like a spotlight. "I don't want to work for him," Ethan said. The honesty slipped out before he filtered it. Her mouth twitched slightly. "I didn't think you would." Silence. He watched her walk back to her desk and sit down. The movement looked heavier now. less controlled. They think I'm too rigid, she said quietly. Too difficult. He didn't respond. They said I don't inspire loyalty, she continued. There was something sharp in her tone now. Not anger, something closer to hurt. Ethan felt something in his chest shift. They're wrong, he said. The words were simple, direct. She looked up at him. For a second, something unguarded flickered across her face. You don't have to say that, she said. I'm not, he replied. He meant it. The office was quiet around them. The building nearly empty now. She leaned back in her chair, studying him. If I stay, she said slowly, it becomes a fight. Political. Ugly. He nodded once. If I leave, I walk away from something I built. He nodded again. Neither option sounded like relief. He glanced at the clock on the wall. 6:41. His daughter. He felt the pull of responsibility tighten inside him. I have to pick up my daughter, he said. The shift in conversation felt abrupt. Real. Her expression softened slightly. Of course, she said. I didn't mean to keep you. He hesitated. He didn't want to leave her in this room alone with the decision sitting on her desk. But he couldn't stay either. That was the shape of his life now, always pulled in one direction, never fully available anywhere else. He stepped toward the door. Ethan. He paused again. Her voice was quieter now. If they cut people, she said, I'll protect you. The words hit wrong, not because they weren't kind, because they carried weight he didn't want her to hold. You don't owe me that, he said. Her gaze didn't waver. I know. That made it worse. He left before the silence grew heavier. The drive to the school felt longer than usual. Traffic thickened with evening commuters. Brake lights glowed red through the damp air. His phone buzzed once in the cup holder. He didn't check it. When he walked into aftercare, his daughter was sitting at a small table, coloring with two other kids. She looked up and smiled when she saw him. Relief washed over him so quickly it almost hurt. Daddy. He crouched down as she ran toward him. She wrapped her arms around his neck. He held her tighter than necessary. You're late, she said. I know. I'm sorry. She pulled back and studied his face. You look weird again. He let out a quiet breath. Yeah, he said. I know. On the drive home, she talked about a game they played outside, about a girl who wouldn't share the jump rope, about a bug she found near the fence. He listened. He always listened. But part of his mind was still in that dim office with her. Restructuring, cuts, fights. He'd chosen this job for stability, for predictability. Now it felt like a floor shifting under his feet. At a red light, he finally glanced at his phone. One new message. From her. I didn't submit the letter. He stared at the words. The light turned green. Cars behind him honked. He put the phone down without replying. That night, after dinner and bath and a story about whales that were too big for their own ocean, he sat alone at the kitchen table. The house felt heavier than usual. He picked up his phone, opened the message again. I didn't submit the letter. No explanation, no question, just a fact. He typed, okay, then erased it. Too cold. He typed again, what are you going to do? He erased that too. Too involved. He set the phone face down on the table. He didn't owe her emotional labor. He didn't owe her advice, but he felt connected to the outcome whether he wanted to be or not. If she fought, the department would feel it. If she left, everything would change. And somewhere inside all of that was his daughter's future. His mortgage. His carefully rebuilt life. His phone buzzed again, another message. They expect an answer by Friday. He closed his eyes briefly. Friday. 3 days. He typed before he could overthink it. Whatever you choose, choose it because you can live with it, not because they can. He stared at the sentence. It was more than he should have said. He hit send anyway. The dots appeared almost immediately. then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, her reply came. "You always say the thing I don't want to hear." He let out a quiet breath through his nose. "I don't mean to." A pause. "Then I know." He put the phone down. His heart was beating faster than it should have been for a text exchange. He leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. This wasn't flirting. It wasn't inappropriate in a visible way, but it wasn't neutral either. There was a thread forming between them. Thin, invisible to anyone else, but real. He stood and walked to his daughter's room, opened the door quietly. She was asleep, one arm hanging off the side of the bed. He stepped inside and gently adjusted her blanket. She stirred slightly, then settled. He watched her for a long moment. This was his center. This was what mattered. Not office politics. Not complicated women with tired eyes. He turned off the small lamp and left the room. Back in the hallway, he paused. He realized something uncomfortable. He wasn't worried about losing his job as much as he was worried about what would happen to her if she lost hers. The thought unsettled him. He walked back to the kitchen and picked up his phone again. No new messages. He didn't send another one. Instead, he turned it off completely and set it on the counter. The silence that followed felt sharp. He stood there in the dim light, hands resting against the cool surface of the counter. He had spent 3 years rebuilding himself into someone steady, someone contained. Now, without any dramatic moment or obvious mistake, something was loosening. Not falling apart. Just loosening. And he wasn't sure if that scared him because it was dangerous, or because part of him didn't want it to stop. By Wednesday, everyone could feel it. The office didn't know the details, but people always sensed pressure before they understood it. Meetings became shorter. Conversations got quieter. People started glancing toward Miss Caldwell's office like they expected smoke to come out from under the door. Ethan kept his head down. He stayed on task, finished everything early, made himself useful in ways that didn't draw attention. That had always been his instinct. If you were valuable enough, maybe the ground didn't shift beneath you. But he knew better. Value didn't protect anyone when decisions were made in boardrooms. At 2011 p.m., his phone buzzed. It wasn't her. It was the school. The number made his stomach drop before he even answered. "Hello? Mr. Mercer?" the boy said. A woman. Calm but tight. "Yes." "This is Ms. Rena from the front office. There was an incident. Your daughter fell during recess." He stood so quickly his chair scraped the floor. "What kind of incident?" She hit her head. "She's awake. She's talking, but she's dizzy, and we'd like you to come immediately." His throat went dry. "I'm coming," he said, already grabbing his jacket. "I'm on my way." He didn't even hang up properly. He left his desk without explaining to anyone. Walked fast through the hallway. The building felt too slow, like it was resisting him. As he reached the elevator, he saw Miss Caldwell stepping out of her office. She looked at him. Just one glance. And her expression changed. "What happened?" she asked. He didn't stop walking. "My daughter. School called. She fell." He pressed the elevator button hard, like it could make it arrive faster. Miss Caldwell didn't hesitate. "I'm coming with you," she said. He turned sharply. "No, you don't need to." "I'm not asking," she said. The elevator doors opened. They stepped inside. The ride down felt endless. Ethan's hands were shaking. He tried to keep them still, tried to breathe like he wasn't about to lose control in front of her. Miss Caldwell stood beside him without speaking. When the doors opened, she followed him out. He walked straight to the parking lot. His car was in the far row. He fumbled with his keys. His hands wouldn't cooperate. Miss Caldwell reached out, calm, and took the keys from him. She unlocked the car in one smooth motion. "Drive," she said. He didn't argue. He got in. She got in beside him. The moment he started the engine, he realized he didn't remember the last part of the phone call. He didn't remember if they said ambulance. He didn't remember if they said blood. His mind was filling in blanks with worst-case images. He pulled out of the lot too fast. "Ethan," Miss Caldwell said quietly. He didn't answer. You need to focus on the road, she said. I am, he snapped. The words came out harsher than he meant. He heard her inhale, but she didn't respond with offense. She just nodded once, accepting it. Traffic was heavy. A delivery truck blocked one lane. Cars crawled. He felt his pulse pounding in his ears. His hands tightened on the steering wheel until his knuckles whitened. Call them, he said suddenly. She turned slightly. Call who? The school, he said. Ask if she's okay. Ask if she's still conscious. Miss Caldwell pulled her phone out immediately. She called without questioning him. While she spoke, Ethan stared at the red brake lights ahead like they were mocking him. Her voice was calm, controlled, professional. When she ended the call, she turned toward him. She's awake, she said. They said she's scared but stable. They're keeping her seated. No vomiting, no loss of consciousness. Ethan's chest loosened slightly. Not enough, but slightly. He nodded once, swallowing. The drive continued in strained silence. When they finally pulled into the school parking lot, Ethan didn't even park properly. He stopped half crooked in a space and left the engine running. He jumped out. Miss Caldwell followed. He ran inside. The front office smelled like hand sanitizer and paper. The fluorescent lights made everything look pale. The secretary looked up, startled. Mr. Mercer. Where is she? He demanded. Right here, another voice said. A teacher stepped forward, holding his daughter's hand. His daughter's face was blotchy. Tears dried on her cheeks. A small ice pack was pressed against her forehead. When she saw him, she burst into fresh sobs. Daddy! He dropped to his knees instantly, arms open. She ran into him. He held her so tightly she squeaked. Baby, I'm here, he whispered into her hair. I'm here. Her small hands gripped his shirt. It hurts, she cried. I know, he murmured. I know. He pulled back just enough to look at her face. There was a red swelling above her eyebrow. Not bleeding, but angry and tender-looking. Her eyes were wide, frightened. His own vision blurred for a second. He blinked hard and forced himself to breathe. What happened? He asked the teacher, voice tight. She tripped on the playground steps, the teacher explained gently. She fell forward, hit her head. We monitored her. She complained of dizziness. Ethan nodded, barely hearing the words. He lifted his daughter carefully. She wrapped her arms around his neck like she was afraid he'd disappear. I want to go home, she whispered. We're going to the doctor first, he said. No, she whimpered. I hate doctors. I know, he murmured, but we have to make sure you're okay. Her tears soaked into his collar. He turned toward the door, ready to leave. That's when he saw Miss Caldwell standing a few feet away. Still, watching. The office staff looked confused, curious. They knew she didn't belong here, but they weren't sure what to do with her presence. Miss Caldwell didn't look like an executive right now. She looked like a woman trying to keep her face neutral while something inside her was reacting. Ethan walked toward her, his daughter still clinging to him. Miston, Caldwell's eyes moved over the child's face, the swelling, the trembling. Then she looked at Ethan. You're shaking, she said quietly. He hadn't noticed. He adjusted his grip on his daughter. I'm fine, he said automatically, but it was a lie. His whole body felt unstable. He stepped outside into the cold air. The sky was low and gray. The wind cut through his jacket. Missed him. Caldwell followed him out. Where are you taking her? She asked. Urgent care, he said. She nodded. I'll drive, she said. He stared at her. No, he said immediately. I can. You're not in a state to argue, she cut in. Her tone was firm, not cruel, just absolute. Ethan hesitated. His daughter shifted in his arms and whimpered again, pressing her face into his neck. He felt his heart clench. He didn't have time for pride. He nodded once. Fine, he said. They got into the car. Miss Caldwell took the driver's seat. Ethan sat in the back with his daughter, holding her against him. As the car pulled out, he stared out the window at the passing buildings. His mind kept jumping. What if she had a concussion? What if she had internal bleeding? What if... He squeezed his eyes shut. He couldn't do this again. He couldn't lose someone again. His daughter sniffled against his shoulder. "I'm sorry," she whispered. The words hit him harder than the fall. He pulled her back and looked at her face. "Don't say that," he said. "But I fell," she said, voice trembling. "I messed up." His throat tightened. "No," he said firmly. "You didn't mess up. You're a kid. Kids fall." She looked at him, still scared. "Are you mad?" she asked. He shook his head. "No," he whispered. "I'm just scared." The admission slipped out before he could stop it. His daughter stared at him for a moment, as if she wasn't used to hearing that word from him. Then she reached up and touched his cheek with her small hand. "It's okay," she whispered. He almost broke right there. He turned his head slightly and pressed his lips to her fingers. In the front seat, Miss Caldwell's eyes flicked up to the rearview mirror. He saw them. She looked away quickly, but the damage was done. She'd seen him like this now. Not controlled, not contained. Just a father, holding his child like the world might take her. The urgent care parking lot was packed. Miss Caldwell found a spot near the entrance anyway, parking too close to the curb. Ethan carried his daughter inside. The waiting room smelled like disinfectant and stale coffee. A television played quietly in the corner, the volume too low to understand. A man coughed behind them. A child cried somewhere. Ethan approached the front desk and explained. They were told to sit, so they sat. His daughter stayed curled in his lap, her arms around his waist. Miss Caldwell sat across from them. She didn't check her phone. She didn't make calls. She just watched. The waiting room clock ticked too loudly. Minutes stretched. Ethan's knee bounced without him noticing. His daughter's breathing slowed slightly, exhaustion taking over fear. Finally, a nurse called her name. Ethan stood quickly. Ms. Caldwell stood too. He carried his daughter down the hallway. In the exam room, the doctor was young, calm, efficient. He asked questions, checked her eyes, her balance, her reflexes. Ethan answered everything, his voice tight. When the doctor asked his daughter to follow his finger with her eyes, she tried, blinking hard. The doctor nodded. "Mild concussion," he said. "But she seems stable, no signs of something more severe." Ethan's lungs finally took a full breath. He didn't realize he'd been starving for air. The doctor continued, explaining rest, no screens, monitoring for vomiting or worsening headache. Ethan nodded to everything. When they left the room, prescription papers in hand, his daughter was quieter. Still sore, still tired, but alive. Fine. He held her close as they walked back out into the waiting room, and then he stopped. Because Miss Caldwell was still there, still waiting, like she hadn't even considered leaving. He looked at her. Something in his chest tightened again, but this time it wasn't fear. It was something else, something uncomfortable, something like gratitude that felt too personal. "She's okay," he said. Ms. Caldwell nodded once, relief flickering across her face before she smoothed it away. "Good," she said softly. Ethan stared at her for a second too long. Then he said, quieter, "You didn't have to stay." She looked at him. Her eyes held something steady. "Yes," she said, "I did." And he didn't know what to do with that answer. The ride home was quieter. His daughter fell asleep again in the back seat, her head against his arm. The ice pack had melted into a damp cloth. Her cheeks were flushed from crying and exhaustion. Ethan kept one hand lightly on her shoulder the whole time, as if she might drift away if he didn't. Miss Caldwell drove carefully. No sudden stops, no sharp turns. The city moved past the windows in gray streaks. People walking under umbrellas. A bus splashing through a puddle. Ordinary life continuing like nothing had happened. That part always felt strange to him. How the world stayed normal even when your own heart was ripping itself open. When they reached his neighborhood, Miss Amer, Caldwell slowed at the corner like she didn't know where to go next. Ethan gave her directions. Second left, blue house with the cracked driveway. She followed them. She parked in front, engine still running, hands resting on the steering wheel. She didn't immediately look at him. Ethan didn't move either. His daughter's breathing was soft, her mouth slightly open, the kind of sleep that came from emotional collapse. Ethan stared at the dashboard. The quiet stretched long enough that he started to feel it pressing on him. Ms. Caldwell spoke first. "Does she always apologize like that?" she asked. Ethan turned his head slightly. "Like what?" "Like she thinks she did something wrong just by getting hurt." His throat tightened. He looked back at his daughter. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe." Miss Caldwell nodded slowly. "She's learning it from somewhere," she said. Ethan's jaw clenched. He didn't like the implication, even if it was true. He opened the car door carefully and lifted his daughter into his arms. Her body sagged against him, limp with sleep. He stepped out into the cold air and closed the door quietly. Miss Caldwell got out too. He hadn't asked her to. He didn't stop her. They walked up the driveway. The concrete was cracked in 2 places. He'd meant to fix it last summer. He never did. He unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The warmth of the house hit him, familiar smells. Laundry detergent. The faint sweetness of the cereal his daughter spilled that morning. Miss Caldwell paused in the entryway. She looked like she didn't belong there, not because she was overdressed. She wasn't. Because his house was small, lived in, soft around the edges. Her world didn't have soft edges. Ethan carried his daughter to her room and laid her down carefully. He removed her shoes, pulled the blanket up, placed the doctor's instructions on the nightstand. His daughter stirred once, then settled. He stood over her bed for a moment longer than necessary. His chest still felt tight, but the worst of the panic had drained out, leaving something hollow behind. When he stepped back into the hallway, Miss Caldwell was still standing near the front door. She hadn't wandered, hadn't explored, hadn't made herself comfortable. Just waited. Ethan closed his daughter's bedroom door halfway and walked toward her. "She's asleep," he said quietly. "Miss Quaidit?" Caldwell nodded. "Good." He hesitated. Then, because it felt wrong to let her stand there like a stranger, he said, "You can sit down if you want." She glanced toward the living room. It wasn't messy, but it wasn't perfect either. A basket of toys in the corner. A folded blanket on the couch. A framed photo on the shelf, his wife holding their daughter as a baby. He watched Miss Gover, Caldwell's eyes land on it. She didn't stare long, but she saw it. And something in her face shifted. She sat on the edge of the couch, posture still controlled, hands clasped in her lap. Ethan stood for a moment, then sat across from her in the armchair, the one he rarely used. The fabric was worn on the arms from years of him gripping it during late nights. Neither of them spoke. The silence didn't feel awkward. It felt heavy, like the house itself was listening. Ethan rubbed his palms against his jeans. His body still felt like it hadn't fully returned from that place of fear. Miss Caldwell looked around slowly. "This is nice," she said. He almost laughed. "It's small," he replied. "That's not what I meant," she said. He didn't respond. She looked at him. "You love her," she said. It wasn't a compliment. It was a statement. Something obvious. Ethan's throat tightened. He nodded once. Miss Caldwell leaned back slightly, gaze drifting to the half-closed hallway door. "She trusts you completely," she said. Ethan stared at his hands. "I'm trying," he said. His voice sounded rougher than he intended. Miss Caldwell's eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion, but in thought. "Trying," she repeated. He glanced up. "You don't think I am?" he asked. She shook her head. "No. I think you're doing more than trying." She paused. "But you don't let yourself feel it." Ethan's jaw tightened again. He hated that she kept seeing things he didn't want named. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. Miss Caldwell didn't look offended. "I know," she said. He exhaled, sharp. "I'm not saying that to be rude." "I know," she repeated, calm. He stared at her, frustrated. "You keep saying you know," he said. Miss Caldwell's eyes stayed on him. "Because you're saying what you think you're supposed to say," she replied. "Not what you actually mean." That hit too close. Ethan leaned back again, swallowing. He looked toward the kitchen as if he could escape into a task. Make tea, wash dishes, do something with his hands. But he stayed. Miss Caldwell shifted slightly on the couch. "I've never been in a house like this," she said. Ethan frowned. "Like what?" "Like one that feels lived in," she said. He stared at her, confused. Her eyes flicked to the toys, the blanket, the framed drawings taped to the wall. "My apartment is quiet," she added. "It's clean. It's expensive. It feels like a hotel room I've been staying in for years." Ethan didn't know what to say to that. He could picture it too easily. White walls, glass tables, no clutter, no warmth, a place no one ran through laughing, a place no one needed you. Miss Caldwell's voice softened. "When your daughter held your face in the car," she said, "it was like watching something I forgot existed." Ethan's chest tightened again. He looked down. He didn't want to talk about that moment. It had been too raw, too exposed. Miss Caldwell continued anyway. "She wasn't scared of you," she said, "even when you admitted you were scared." Ethan swallowed. "She's a kid," he said. "Miss Pralday." Caldwell's eyes stayed steady. "No," she said quietly. "She's your kid." The words sat in the room like a weight. Ethan stared at the carpet. He could feel the tension in his shoulders, the exhaustion underneath it, the constant need to hold everything in place. He didn't realize how much until someone else was sitting in his living room, seeing it. He spoke without meaning to. "She reminds me of her mother." The sentence came out like it had been waiting. Miss Caldwell didn't react too fast. She didn't say anything at first. Then she asked gently, "In what way?" Ethan's throat tightened. He stared toward the bookshelf, toward the photo. "In the way she forgives too easily," he said. His voice was quiet now, almost flat. "In the way she thinks love is something you earn by being good." He swallowed. "That was my wife," he added. "She gave everything. She apologized for things she didn't cause. She tried to make everyone comfortable." He paused. "And then she got sick, and she still apologized, like her body was inconveniencing people." The room went silent again. Miss Corline Caldwell's face looked different now, less guarded. She didn't reach for him, didn't touch him, but she stayed fully present. Ethan's eyes stung. He blinked hard. "I promised myself I wouldn't let my daughter grow up thinking she has to earn love," he said. "But today, when she said sorry, I realized she's already learning it." His voice cracked slightly at the end. He hated that. He clenched his jaw and looked away. Miss Caldwell's voice was low. "You can't control everything she absorbs," she said. Ethan let out a bitter breath. "I know." "But you can show her something else," she said. He glanced at her. Miss Caldwell held his gaze. "You already are," she added. Ethan stared at her for a long moment. The gratitude rose again, uncomfortable and sharp. He didn't want to owe her anything. He didn't want to need her words. But he did. He stood up abruptly, as if motion could shake the feeling off. "I should make sure she's okay," he said, though she was asleep and fine. Miss Caldwell didn't call him out. She just nodded. Ethan walked down the hallway and opened his daughter's door quietly. She was still asleep, breathing slow. He stood there, watching her chest rise and fall. He felt his hands tremble slightly, not from fear anymore, from the leftover adrenaline, from the memory of what it felt like to think she might not be okay. He closed the door again and returned to the living room. Miss Caldwell was standing now, as if she'd decided she'd stayed too long. "I should go," she said. Ethan nodded automatically. But something inside him resisted the ending of the moment, not because he wanted her there, because he didn't want to go back to being alone in it. He walked her to the door. She put her hand on the doorknob, then paused. Her back was to him. She didn't turn around right away. When she finally did, her eyes looked different. Not vulnerable in a dramatic way, just tired, honest. "I'm glad she's okay," she said. Ethan nodded. "Me too." Ms. nodded. Caldwell hesitated again. Then she said very quietly, "I don't have anyone who would come for me like that." The words weren't self-pitying. They were factual, almost surprised, like she just realized it herself. Ethan's throat tightened. He didn't know how to respond. He didn't have a comforting line. He didn't have a solution. So he said, the only true thing he could. "That's not fair," he said. Miss Caldwell stared at him. For a second, her face looked like it might break. But she held it together. She nodded once. Then she opened the door. Cold air rushed in. She stepped outside. Ethan stood in the doorway watching her walk down the cracked driveway. Halfway to her car, she turned back. Not dramatically, just enough to meet his eyes one more time. And then she said something that stayed with him for a long time after the car drove away. "I don't think you realize how rare you are." Ethan didn't answer. He couldn't. He just stood there until her taillights disappeared down the street. Then he closed the door and leaned his forehead against it for a moment, eyes shut. His chest felt tight. Not from panic. From the weight of what she'd said. Because he knew what she meant. And he also knew what it would cost if he believed her. By Thursday morning, the office felt like it was holding its breath. It wasn't obvious in the way people spoke. It was in the way they didn't. Conversations stopped when someone walked by. People checked their emails more often than usual, laughed a little too loudly when they did laugh. Ethan arrived early. Not because he needed to. Because the house had felt too quiet after she left. He hated that thought as soon as it formed. He sat at his desk with a cup of coffee that went cold untouched. The numbers on his screen blurred in and out as his mind kept drifting. Her standing in his living room. Her looking at his daughter like she'd been shown something she didn't know she wanted. Her voice at the door. "I don't think you realize how rare you are." He hadn't answered. He still didn't know what an answer would even look like. At 9:40, someone dropped a stack of printed reports on his desk. It was Nora from finance. Late 20s, sharp, always cheerful in a way that felt deliberate. "Morning," she said. "Morning." She lingered, leaning slightly on the edge of his desk. "You hear anything?" she asked quietly. Ethan didn't look up. "About what?" She rolled her eyes. "Come on," she said. "The Caldwell thing. People are saying the board wants her out." Ethan kept his expression neutral. "I haven't heard anything," he lied. Nora studied him like she didn't believe him. Then she smiled. "You're boring," she said, and walked away. Ethan exhaled slowly. It was starting. The whispers. He should have expected it, but he'd hoped the office would stay blind to the tension. Blind to her. Blind to him. At 11:15, his phone buzzed. A message from Ms. Caldwell. "Can you come up?" He stared at it. Then he stood. Her office door was closed again. He knocked. "Come in." She was behind her desk this time, laptop open, papers spread out. She looked like she'd been working nonstop, but her eyes were slightly red, not crying red, sleepless red. He stepped inside and shut the door. She didn't look up right away. "Sit," she said. He sat in the chair across from her desk. The silence stretched, then she slid a document toward him. Board letterhead. He didn't touch it. "What is it?" he asked. "My agreement," she said. "If I accept the restructure." His stomach tightened. "So, you're staying," he said. She didn't answer directly. She tapped the paper once lightly. "They want me to sign by tomorrow morning." Ethan stared at the document like it might bite him. "And if you don't?" She leaned back, expression flat. "They'll make it public within the week, and they'll start cutting." He nodded slowly. "So you're going to sign?" She finally looked at him. Her eyes held something sharp now. Not anger? Resignation. "I don't know," she said quietly. "I don't know what the right decision is anymore." Ethan's jaw tightened. He hated seeing her like this. He hated that he cared. "You're not going to quit," he said. Her eyes narrowed. "That's not your call." "No," he said. "But I know you. You don't quit. You fight until there's nothing left to fight with." Miss Caldwell stared at him. Her lips parted slightly, like she was about to say something sharp back. Then she didn't. She looked down at her hands. "I don't want to fight anymore," she admitted. The words were small, almost swallowed. Ethan felt the sentence hit him in the ribs. He leaned forward slightly. "Then don't," he said. She looked up. Ethan's voice was quieter now. "If you're tired, stop," he said. "Walk away. Let them deal with their own mess for once." Miss Caldwell's eyes stayed on his. Her expression softened just a fraction. "That's easy for you to say," she murmured. Ethan's jaw clenched. "You think it's easy?" he asked. His voice came out low, tight. He didn't mean to sound angry, but it was there anyway. "I've been walking away from things my whole life," he continued. "Not because I wanted to. Because I had to." She held his gaze. "You think I wanted to leave my last job?" he asked. "You think I wanted to lose my wife? You think I wanted to rebuild everything from scratch?" The room went still. Miss Caldwell didn't move. Ethan realized his hands were shaking again. He forced them still. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "That wasn't—" "No," she said, cutting him off gently. "Don't apologize." He stared at her. She stood up slowly, walking around the desk. She stopped a few feet from him. Not close enough to touch. Close enough that he could feel her presence like heat. "You're right," she said softly. "It's not easy." Ethan didn't respond. Miss Caldwell's voice lowered further. "I don't want to sign this," she admitted. He looked up at her. "Then don't," he repeated. She exhaled slowly, like she was trying to steady herself. "I'm scared," she said. The admission sounded foreign coming from her. Ethan felt something in his chest shift. He stood up. Now they were facing each other. Close. Too close. The air between them felt thick. "You're allowed to be scared," he said quietly. Miss Caldwell's eyes flicked down to his mouth, then back up. It happened fast. But he saw it, and his stomach tightened. He should have stepped back. He didn't. Miss Caldwell's voice was barely above a whisper, not used to being allowed anything. Ethan swallowed. He could hear his own heartbeat. He could feel the edge of the moment, forming one of those moments where the next decision changed everything. He thought about his daughter. He thought about the office. He thought about the careful walls he'd built. And then Miss Caldwell said something that made him freeze. "I saw your wife's photo," she whispered. His body stiffened instantly. His eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in reflexive defense. Miss Caldwell didn't look away. "She was beautiful," she said softly. Ethan's throat tightened. He didn't speak. "Miss Caldwell continued, voice calm but heavy. "She looks like the kind of woman who would have forgiven you for anything." Ethan felt something dark and sharp twist inside him. He stared at her, pulse pounding. "That's not your place," he said quietly. Her face tightened, regret flickering immediately. "I know," she said. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have." He cut her off. "No," he said, voice low. "You don't understand." Miss Caldwell went still. Ethan's hands clenched at his sides. His mind flashed back to the hospital room. The smell of antiseptic, the sound of machines, the way his wife's hand had felt cold in his, the way she tried to smile at him even when she couldn't breathe properly, the way she'd whispered, "You're going to be okay," like she believed it. He swallowed hard. "She didn't forgive me," he said. Miss Caldwell's eyes widened slightly. Ethan stared at the floor, voice rough. "She didn't have to," he said, "because she never blamed me, even when she should have." The room was silent. Miss Caldwell didn't move. Ethan forced himself to look up again. He could see the impact on her face, the way the words landed, the way she didn't know what to do with them. He continued anyway, voice quiet now. "I was supposed to take her to the doctor sooner," he admitted. "She told me she was tired. She told me she didn't feel right. And I kept saying we'd go later, that it was probably stress, that we didn't have time." His throat tightened. "I was busy," he said. "I was working. I was trying to be responsible." He let out a bitter breath, and by the time I finally listened, it was already too late. Ms. Caldwell's hand lifted slightly, like she might reach for him. Then she stopped herself. Ethan shook his head once, small. I don't talk about her because I can't, he said, because every time I do, I hear her voice, and I remember how I failed her. Miss Caldwell's eyes looked glossy again, but she didn't cry. She just stood there, absorbing it. Ethan felt exposed, stripped. He hated it. He stepped back abruptly, creating distance between them. I need to go, he said. Miss Caldwell's voice was tight. Ethan, I can't, he said, cutting her off. He grabbed the folder on her desk without thinking, then realized what he was doing and set it back down. His movements were clumsy now, uncontrolled. He reached for the door. Miss Mans, Caldwell spoke again, softer. You didn't fail her. Ethan froze with his hand on the doorknob. He didn't turn around. He didn't trust his face. You don't know that, he said. I do, she replied. He swallowed hard. His voice came out low. If you sign that agreement tomorrow, he said without looking at her, do it because you want to, not because you think you deserve punishment. Silence. Then, behind him, he heard her inhale sharply, like the words had struck something deep. He opened the door and left before she could answer. The hallway outside felt too bright, too normal. People walked past with coffee cups and laptops like nothing had just happened in that office. Ethan walked straight to the stairwell and pushed the door open. The cold concrete smell hit him. He leaned against the wall, breathing hard, staring at the steps like they could hold him up. His hands were shaking again. Not from fear this time. From memory. From saying it out loud. He pressed his fist against his mouth and stayed there, silent, until the shaking eased. When he finally stood up straight, his phone buzzed. A text. From an unknown number. He opened it. Stop meeting with her. People are noticing. Ethan stared at the screen. His stomach dropped. His chest tightened. He read it again. Then again. The stairwell suddenly felt smaller. The air thicker. He didn't know who sent it. But he knew what it meant. This wasn't private anymore. Someone was watching. And if someone was watching, then the cost wasn't just emotional. It was real. It was his job, his daughter, everything he built. He stood there staring at the message until the screen dimmed. Then he slowly slid the phone into his pocket, like it was something dangerous, and he went back out into the hallway, forcing his face into calm. Because that's what he did. He held it together. Even when the walls started closing in, he didn't tell her about the message. Not that day. He went back to his desk and sat down like nothing happened. He answered emails, reviewed reports, made a few calls. His hands moved automatically, but his mind stayed in the stairwell. Stop meeting with her. People are noticing. He kept seeing the words like they were still lit on the screen. It wasn't just gossip. The tone wasn't curious. It was a warning, or a threat. He tried to think logically. Maybe it was Nora. Maybe someone bored. Someone trying to stir drama. But it didn't feel like that. It felt cold, and it landed too perfectly on the truth. By the time he left the office that evening, he was already scanning faces differently, watching who watched him, noticing who looked away too quickly. The parking lot felt too open. He got into his car and locked the doors immediately. On the drive to pick up his daughter, he kept checking his mirrors like he expected someone to follow. Nothing, just ordinary traffic. Still, his shoulders stayed tight. His daughter ran to him at aftercare like she always did, smiling like the world had never hurt her. He lifted her up and spun her once. She laughed. The sound hit him in the chest. It reminded him what he was protecting. At home, he made dinner, helped her with her pajamas, read her a story twice because she insisted the first time didn't count. When she finally fell asleep, he sat in the hallway outside her room for a long time, not leaning on the wall, not in some dramatic way, just sitting there with his back against the door frame, arms resting on his knees. The house was quiet, and in that quiet, He thought about the message again. He thought about how easily his life could collapse. He wasn't naive. He understood how it looked, an employee spending private time with the CEO, lunches, closed-door conversations, leaving the building together. Even if nothing inappropriate had happened, perception was enough. And if someone wanted her out, they'd use anything. He didn't know if she realized that. Maybe she did. Maybe she didn't care. That thought bothered him more than it should have. He stood up and walked into the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water, drank half of it without tasting it, then his phone buzzed. Her name. He stared at it for a full 5 seconds before answering. "Hello?" Her voice came through quietly. "Ethan." He didn't say her name back. He waited. "I didn't sign it," she said. The words hit him like a slow exhale he didn't know he'd been holding. He sat down at the kitchen table. "Okay," he said. "I told them no," she continued. "I told them I wasn't accepting a position designed to humiliate me." Ethan stayed silent. He could picture her saying it. Calm, direct, dangerous. "And?" he asked. There was a pause. "They were not pleased," she said flatly. He leaned back in his chair, eyes closed briefly. "What happens now?" "They'll retaliate," she replied. Quietly, strategically. Ethan's jaw tightened. He should have told her then. About the text. But something stopped him. Not because he wanted to protect her feelings, because if he said it out loud, it would become real, a confirmation that they were being watched, that the thing between them, whatever it was, had already become leverage. Miss Caldwell spoke again. "I shouldn't be calling you," she said. Ethan didn't answer. He heard her breathe on the other end. She stopped. Then she tried again. "I didn't want to be alone with it." Ethan stared at the glass of water. The surface reflected the kitchen light in a dull shimmer. He thought about his daughter asleep down the hall. He thought about the promise he'd made to himself after his wife died. No chaos, no risk, no choices that put her life in danger. But he also thought about the way Miss Caldwell had stood in his living room, like she'd been starving for something she didn't know how to ask for. He spoke quietly. "You're not alone," he said. The words came out before he filtered them. There was silence on the line. Then her voice softened. "Thank you," she said. He could hear something in her tone now. Not relief. Something closer to being seen. Ethan's stomach tightened. He forced his voice back into steadiness. "You should get some sleep," he said. She let out a small breath, almost a laugh. "I don't sleep," she replied. "I know," he said. Another pause. Then she said, "Ethan, did you ever think you'd love again?" The question hit him like a physical impact. His spine straightened. His heart started beating faster. He didn't answer immediately. He could feel his body trying to retreat, like it always did when someone stepped too close to the truth. "Why are you asking me that?" he asked quietly. Her voice was low. "Because I don't know what I'm doing," she admitted. "And I don't like not knowing." Ethan swallowed. He stared at the dark kitchen window. His reflection stared back. He looked older than he felt. He spoke carefully. "I don't know," he said. It was the only honest answer. Miss Caldwell was quiet. Then she said, "I'm sorry. That was unfair." Ethan closed his eyes. He should have ended the call. He should have said goodnight and hung up. Instead, he said, "No one's asked me that in a long time." Her voice softened. "What would you say if someone did?" she asked. Ethan's throat tightened. He could feel the ache rising again, deep and familiar. He thought about his wife's laugh. The kitchen. The hospital. The last look in her eyes. He thought about the way he'd survived after, the way he'd kept moving because his daughter needed him. "I don't know if I'm capable of it," he admitted. The words tasted bitter. Miss Caldwell didn't respond right away. Then she said quietly, "I think you are. I think you're just afraid of what it would cost." Ethan's jaw clenched. He hated that she was right. Because love always cost something, and he had already paid more than he could afford. He heard her breathe again, slower now. "I'm sorry," she said. "I shouldn't be doing this." Ethan stared at the table. He didn't disagree, but he didn't stop her either. Before he could speak, she said, "I should let you go." He nodded, even though she couldn't see it. "Yeah," he said, "you should." There was a pause. Then she said, almost quietly enough that he barely heard it, "Good night, Ethan." "Good night," he replied. The call ended. He sat there for a long time afterward, staring at the dark screen of his phone. His hands were still, but his chest felt tight, like his body was bracing for something. He finally stood, walked to the counter, and placed the phone down like it was heavy. Then he turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. He didn't sleep. He lay there listening to the ceiling fan click. The message from earlier sat in his pocket like a stone. He pulled his phone out and read it again in the dark. "Stop meeting with her. People are noticing." His thumb hovered over the screen. He almost deleted it, but he didn't. He took a screenshot instead. Then he turned the phone off and placed it back on the nightstand. His heart was beating too fast. He stared at the ceiling, jaw clenched, and realized something that made his stomach turn. This wasn't just about him anymore. Someone had decided to interfere, and once people started interfering, it never stayed small. It always spread. It always found the weakest point. And his weakest point was sleeping down the hall. His daughter. He turned his head toward the dark doorway, listened for any sound. Nothing. Just silence. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, like a line had been crossed. And even if he backed away now, even if he never spoke to Miss Caldwell again, the attention was already on them. The only question left was what it would cost. And who would pay first? Friday morning felt wrong before it even started. He woke up before his alarm, eyes open in the dark. No dream, no sound, just a sharp awareness sitting in his chest. For a second, he didn't remember why. Then it came back. The board. The unsigned agreement. The message. He turned his head toward the hallway, listening. His daughter was still asleep. He could hear the soft rhythm of her breathing through the monitor. He stayed in bed a moment longer than usual, staring at the ceiling. He felt tired in a different way now, not just from lack of sleep, from anticipation. He got up quietly, showered, dressed, made breakfast. His daughter shuffled into the kitchen, rubbing her eyes. "Is it Friday?" she asked. "Yeah." She smiled faintly. "Pizza day." He nodded. She climbed into her chair and swung her legs under the table. He watched her eat, watched the way she wiped her mouth with the back of her hand even though he'd told her not to 100 times. Watched the way she hummed when she thought no one was listening. He tried to memorize it. He didn't know why. He just felt like he needed to. When he dropped her off at school, she hugged him longer than usual. "You're squeezing again," she said. He loosened his arms. "Sorry." She studied his face. "You look weird." He almost smiled. "Probably just tired." She nodded like that made sense and ran off. He stood there a second longer, watching her disappear inside. Then he got back in his car. The office parking lot was already fuller than normal. He noticed it immediately. More cars. More movement. Inside, the air felt tight. People were pretending not to stare at Miss Caldwell's office. Her door was closed. Ethan sat at his desk and logged in. His hands were steady. His chest was not. At 9:02 a.m., a calendar notification popped up on everyone's screen. Mandatory department meeting. 9:30 a.m. His stomach dropped. He leaned back slightly in his chair. It was happening. By 9:28, the conference room was full. People stood along the walls, whispered to each other, eyes flicking toward the door. Eyes flicking toward the door. Ethan stayed near the back. He didn't want to be visible. At 9:31, the door opened. Miss Caldwell walked in. Behind her were 2 board members, Westbrook among them. Ethan felt something cold settle in his gut. She walked to the head of the table, didn't rush, didn't hesitate. Her face was calm, too calm. The room quieted. Westbrook cleared his throat first, smiling in that polished way that never reached his eyes. "We appreciate everyone coming on short notice," he began. Ethan barely heard him. He was watching her. She stood with her hands lightly resting on the table, not gripping it, not trembling, just steady. Westbrook continued. After discussions with the board, we've decided to move forward with a structural realignment. Miss Caldwell interrupted him. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut clean through his. That won't be necessary, she said. The room froze. Westbrook turned toward her, smile faltering. I beg your pardon? Miss Caldwell didn't look at him. She looked at the room, at her team, at Ethan. For the sake of clarity, she said evenly, I've submitted my resignation, effective immediately. The air shifted. A collective inhale. Someone near the door muttered something under their breath. Westbrook blinked. I don't believe that was the agreement, he said tightly. Miss Caldwell finally turned toward him. No, she replied. It wasn't. Silence. Ethan felt his pulse in his throat. She continued, voice controlled. I will not lead a department under conditions designed to undermine its integrity, nor will I remain in a role where my leadership is intentionally diluted for political convenience. Her words were precise, measured, not emotional. But there was something under them. Relief. Westbrook's face had hardened. This is highly irregular, he said. So was the offer, she replied. A few people in the room shifted. No one spoke. Ethan's heart was pounding now. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected her to walk away so cleanly. Westbrook tried to recover. We'll be appointing interim leadership, he said briskly. Transition plans will be communicated. Miss Caldwell stepped back from the table. She didn't look at Ethan again. Not directly, but he felt it. The weight of what she'd chosen. The board members left first. Westbrook lingered, scanning the room like he was taking inventory of loyalty. Then he followed them out. The room stayed silent for several seconds after the door closed. Then the whispers began. Low. Sharp. What just happened? She quit? Are we getting cut? Ethan didn't move. He watched her. She gathered a thin folder from the table. Nothing else. No dramatic exit. No speech. Just a quiet end. As she walked past him, she slowed slightly. Not enough for anyone to notice. Just enough for him to hear her say under her breath, Don't follow. Then she kept walking. He stayed where he was. His body wanted to move. To go after her. To say something. But he didn't. He stood there and let her leave alone. Because that's what she'd asked. And because someone was watching. By noon, the office was chaos. Emails flying, HR scheduling individual meetings, rumors mutating every minute. Ethan checked his phone. No new messages. The anonymous number hadn't written again. He didn't know if that was good or bad. At 2:17 p.m., he got called into HR, a small office. Neutral walls. Forced smiles. They told him his role would remain intact under new leadership. They praised his performance. They assured him the transition would be smooth. He nodded through all of it. None of it mattered. When he left the building at 5, the sky was clear for the first time all week. He stood in the parking lot for a second, looking at her empty spot. It felt strange how quickly someone could disappear. He got into his car and drove to pick up his daughter. She ran to him like always. Pizza was good, she announced. He smiled faintly. Good. On the drive home, she talked non-stop. He listened. But part of him felt hollow. He didn't regret telling her not to sign. He didn't regret being honest, but watching her walk away like that, it settled somewhere deep. That night, after his daughter fell asleep, he sat in the living room alone. The house felt too quiet again. He picked up his phone, scrolled through his messages. Her name sat there. The last message from her, Good night, Ethan. He stared at it for a long time. Then his phone buzzed. A new message. From her. It's done. He stared at the screen. His fingers hovered. He typed, Are you okay? The reply came quickly. I will be. He exhaled slowly. Another message came. You were right. His chest tightened. He didn't know which part she meant. He typed carefully. About what? There was a pause this time. Longer. Then, about choosing something I can live with. He leaned back in his chair. His heart felt heavy. He typed. And can you? The dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Finally. Yes. A minute passed. Then another message came. I didn't do it for them. His throat tightened. He knew it was coming. I did it for me. He swallowed. And then the final message. And maybe a little because you reminded me I deserve better. He closed his eyes. The room felt smaller. He didn't respond immediately, because he knew whatever he said next would matter. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't want to choose from fear. He wanted to choose from something else. He opened his eyes and started typing. He erased the first response. It had been safe. Careful. Something about being proud of her. It sounded like a colleague, not like the truth. He stared at the blank message field again. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. The clock on the wall ticked in slow, steady beats. He thought about the day she walked into that meeting. The way she didn't hesitate. The way she didn't look back. He thought about her standing in his living room, looking at his daughter like she'd just seen something sacred. He thought about the hospital room years ago. The smell, the machines, his wife's hand in his. He had built his life around survival after that. Stability, predictability, containment. He had told himself that was strength. Maybe it was, but it was also hiding. His thumb moved. You deserve better, he typed. He stared at it, then added, but don't make me the reason. He read it twice. It felt honest. He hit send. The response didn't come immediately this time. He stood up and walked to the hallway, listening at his daughter's door. Still asleep. He stepped inside anyway just to look at her. She had kicked off her blanket again. He pulled it back up gently. Her face was relaxed, the small bruise on her forehead already fading slightly. He brushed a piece of hair off her cheek. Love doesn't get earned, he whispered, barely audible even to himself. He wasn't sure if he was saying it to her, or to the version of himself that still didn't believe it. His phone buzzed in his hand. He stepped back into the hallway before reading it. Her message was longer. I'm not making you the reason. You're not a fantasy, Ethan. You're a mirror. You make me see things I've avoided. He felt that in his chest. Another message followed. And that scares me more than the board ever did. He leaned against the wall. He didn't feel triumphant. He didn't feel flattered. He felt exposed. He typed slowly. This isn't simple. 3 dots appeared quickly. I know. He continued. You were my boss this morning. You're not anymore, she replied. He stared at that. It was technically true, but it wasn't the point. He typed again. It's not just that. There was a pause. Longer this time. When her reply came, it was simple. It's your daughter. His throat tightened. Yes, he wrote. A minute passed. Then I would never put her at risk. He believed her. That wasn't the issue. He leaned his head back against the wall and closed his eyes. He wasn't afraid of scandal. He wasn't afraid of gossip. He was afraid of destabilizing the only solid thing left in his life. He typed carefully. I can't afford chaos. Her response was immediate. I'm not chaos. He almost smiled at that. Almost. He thought about the week. The texts. The meetings. The looks. It had felt like chaos. But not loud chaos. The quiet kind. The kind that slipped under doors. He pushed off the wall and walked back into the living room, sitting on the couch. He typed again. Maybe not. But this feels like standing on a fault line. The reply came slower this time. You think loving someone is an earthquake. He stared at that. He didn't answer. She sent another message. Maybe it's not destruction. Maybe it's just movement. He let out a quiet breath. Movement. He hadn't allowed that word in a long time. His life had been frozen in certain places since the hospital. He had grown around the grief, not through it. He typed, "What are you asking for?" The answer didn't come immediately. He waited. Then coffee. He blinked. Another message. Not tonight. Not tomorrow. Just coffee. Without hiding, his pulse picked up. He read it again. It was small. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't reckless. It was simple. He looked around his living room. The toys. The blanket. The framed photo. He stood up and walked over to it. Picked it up carefully. His wife's smile stared back at him from years ago. He traced the edge of the frame with his thumb. "I don't know how to do this," he said quietly to the empty room. The silence didn't answer. But it didn't accuse him either. He set the photo back down, sat again. He thought about the promise he'd made. No chaos. No risk. But he had never promised no change. He picked up his phone. "Coffee," he typed. He paused, then added, "In public." He sent it. Her response came almost immediately. Of course. He felt something shift inside him. Not a rush, not fireworks, just a small internal movement. Like something long stiff was finally bending. Another message came. "Thank you for not running." He stared at it. He had been running. For years. From grief. From vulnerability. From anything that threatened the careful balance he'd built. He typed back, "I'm not promising anything." Her reply, "I'm not asking for promises." He let out a slow breath. That felt important. No promises. No dramatic declarations. Just movement. He stood up and turned off the living room light. The house fell into shadow. He walked back down the hallway and stood at his daughter's door one more time. He listened. Her breathing steady. Safe. Safe. He realized something then. Loving someone again wouldn't replace what he'd lost. It wouldn't betray it either. It would just be different. He stepped into his bedroom and lay down. The other side of the bed was still empty. It might always feel that way. But for the first time in years, the emptiness didn't feel like something he had to protect. It felt like space, and space, he was starting to understand, wasn't always a threat. Sometimes it was room for something new. He closed his eyes. He didn't know what coffee would lead to. He didn't know how the office fallout would unfold. He didn't know if loving again would break him open in ways he couldn't manage. But he knew this. He was tired of mistaking survival for living, and for the first time since the hospital room, he felt the smallest, quietest shift inside his chest. Not relief, not certainty, just permission. To move,